Okay, so let's start the debate. Thank you all for coming. The motion is this House would not have children. If you haven't already put down what side you're for, let Jamie know at some point, and then at the end of the debate we'll see if anyone's changed their mind, if they've done a decent job. So let's start with Elsa. She's going to be speaking first. I'd like to call the Prime Minister to start the case here.
Dear audience, making the decision to have a child is making the decision of forcing another human being into an existence that is guaranteed to be full of suffering. This is something immoral, and this is the reason why on side proposition we would not have children. I'm going to talk about two major things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to tell you why we think it is the case that life contains more pain than pleasure, and why that's necessarily true. Secondly, I'm going to tell you how that generates a moral obligation to not have children. Firstly, let's be very clear on what this debate is really about. Firstly, this debate takes place in a situation where choice exists, i.e. we are debating this as a potential parent, someone who can choose to have a child but can also choose to not have a child, i.e. there is a genuine choice. Secondly, this debate is about future or potential children who don't exist or who don't yet exist, i.e. we're talking about having your own biological children, things like surrogacy. We are not talking about children who already exist. We think that at the point where a child does exist, we should take care of it and try to give it as good a life as possible. So we're not saying that we're going to sterilize people and kill all the babies. What we are saying is that given the trade-off, not having children is the better choice, and it is the choice that we would make. Okay. Why is it the case that life on average contains more suffering than pleasure? Firstly, let's just talk briefly about statistics and the reality of the world we live in. Because it is just simply and empirically true that a child is very likely to be born into things like poverty, things like conflict, wars, structural discrimination, and various types of suffering. I think because of this, most people's lives simply aren't that great, and giving birth to a child, it means that you're likely to force someone into such an existence that's going to be quite terrible. Notice also that processes such as climate change means that these things are likely to get worse because there's not going to be clean air for people to breathe. There's going to be wars over limited resources to an even larger extent than there is now. People's homes are literally going to be underwater. All these things are almost certainly going to happen. And not only are they going to happen and make people's lives terrible, but they're also likely to be worse for future children than for their parents. Because as someone going to have a child, you're likely about 30 years of age, you might have X number of years left to live. Your child in the future is going to live for more years, and they're going to live those years in the future where climate change is substantially worse than it currently is. Even if none of this was the case, however, even if you could think of the most privileged future baby who would not suffer the consequences of poverty, who would not ever be sick, who would not suffer the consequences of climate change, it is still guaranteed to experience things like heartbreak, failure, disease, stress, anxiety, sadness, pain, and all other things that makes life awful and makes life not worthy of being led. It's guaranteed to experience comfort, i.e. being most of the time a bit too warm or a bit too cold, but almost never just that right temperature. I mean that it's going to be usually too hungry or too full, but never just that right amount of fullness. We think even in the best of worlds, a very small proportion of your time is actually enjoyable and is actually pleasurable enough for you to want to, to weigh out all the bad things that happen. Notice also that even in the best case scenario, there is existential dread which arises from the fact that humans are on the one hand wired to want to stay alive. This is how our brains work. This is what our instinct is to do. Yet at the same time, humans uniquely know that we are going to die, and that pleasure is fleeting. The enjoyment we experience is fleeting, is temporary, and is not going to last. We think that the fear of death is itself a bad thing, that it's a necessary part of life and that everyone experiences. And we think that fear and that existential dread is worse than not having existed in the first place. It was worse than not having experienced anything at all. Why, by contrast, is happiness unlikely and uncertain in life? Firstly, it's incredibly rare because of sheer statistics, i.e. most people just don't have lives that aren't that great and don't experience that many enjoyable things in their lives. Secondly, pleasure and happiness are necessarily fleeting, are necessarily temporary. This is firstly because of the nature of things that we enjoy, and the nature of things that make us happy is such that we enjoy it because it's unusual, because it's different from how we spend most of our lives, i.e. either in the sort of middle state or in extreme pain or extreme displeasure. Secondly, we're often too busy to fully enjoy life. And finally, pleasure is often tainted by the knowledge that it's not going to last. Thirdly, pleasure is never guaranteed. Happiness is never guaranteed, and it's possible to live a life that's entirely devoid of any sort of enjoyment. However, it is not possible to avoid the sort of pains and discomforts that I've listed previously. Why does this, then, create a moral obligation to not have children? Notice that in any other circumstances, we think it's completely unacceptable to disproportionately harm others, and we think it's immoral to bestow suffering and pain on other people. I.e., even if it might be good for me to steal something, it's still immoral because it harms someone else, it harms the owner of that thing I steal. It might be pleasurable for me to punch Anita in the face, but we don't think that's a moral thing to do because it hurts her. Now, by analogy, having a child means that you're forcing pain onto another being. You're forcing someone to exist without their consent, and you're forcing them to exist in circumstances where they are guaranteed to experience immeasurable amounts of pain, immeasurable amounts of suffering. This is bad for two reasons. Firstly, children cannot consent. And not only is there literally no choice, you don't consent to being born, which in itself makes birth bad, but you can't even give hypothetical consent, or they can't even be hypothetical consent. Because it's impossible for parents to predict what the world is going to look like in, say, 50 years from now. And it's impossible for them to know whether or not their children will have a good life or not. Secondly, we think parents just should not create unnecessary suffering. Parents have choice, parents have agency. They can choose not to increase the amount of suffering in this world. And we think that even if it might be the case that they would be slightly happier if they had children. Firstly, because the number of years they have left to live, we think it's simply not worth the trade-off. Secondly, you can adopt existing children. And thirdly, we think it's very possible to live a meaningful life without children. Panel, pleasure is uncertain, pain is guaranteed. Please, proper system.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for that speech and call the leader of the opposition to open the side to their case. In here. Note that unlike the situation that Elsa points out, that is indeed not the case, because Anita getting slapped in the face
still has the opportunity to experience the other joys in life, and she's not being slapped in the face. And she also has the opportunity to react towards the person who's slapping to the face, even though that extent may be small. So the difference between not giving a child life and giving them a life is that when you give them a life, you give them the opportunity to do something with the situation, or at least have the choice or the opportunity to make whatever they want out of their life. So sure, existence can be pain for some people, but they have choice once they are given a life, and the ultimate way in which you revoke the agency or opportunity is if you don't have the child in the first place and you don't give the opportunity for them to be born. So, sure, some people may be born into socioeconomic conditions that mean that they can never be that investment banker with a six-figure salary. They may be trapped in a life where they can only be, say, like a garbage collector. But they may not even want to be an investment banker. They may be a very happy garbage collector. And on top of that, they have the small opportunity to ascend, even though this is unlikely. And this choice and this hope gives them a reason to be alive and gives them a reason to fuel their motivation in the first place. So we think that the burden on proposition now is to prove that why experiencing nothing is still better than experiencing something and having the opportunity to choose. So 2 reasons why we think that we should have children, or that the individual should make the decision to have children. First of all, it's instrumental for the individual's character building, and second of all, it's important for the human race both currently and in the future. So why is it important for character building? So we think that this character building happens at 2 points when you have a child. First of all, the outset of having a child in the first place, and second of all, when you raise the child and in the process of raising like a rebellious teenager. So when you have a child in the first place, what tends to be the situation in most cases is that parents see a shift in their priorities. This shift is guided by both hormones and the logistical practicalities of raising a child. The fact that the child needs a lot more of your time, and the fact that the child needs a lot more of your attention. So this means that you shift your mentality from being one that is self-gratifying, that is focusing on spending your paycheck on material things, to one that is focused on the upbringing of a child and saving your money for more meaningful long-term things such as education. It means that you stop thinking of your own interests first and you start thinking of the needs of another child. And this is important because it's an important attitude for someone in society to have, because they stop being self-centered and they start being more selfless, because they now practice the ability to transfer their priorities from themselves onto someone else. So this is important for interactions with other people, but also for society, because now people stop becoming inward-looking and they start externalizing their priorities. They start doing things like caring about climate change, because now they have children that are going to be living in a society where the climate progressively gets worse. And they start caring about improving current systems and current policies, because their children are going to benefit from it in the future. So we think that this is critical for them to become a functional and sort of altruistic member of society, compared to if they were to not have children and maintain their self as their first priority. So it encourages people to think forward and to care about things other than themselves. But second of all, when you're raising a rebellious teenager, what happens is that you also learn how to empathize. This is because in society, when you interact with people who are not like-minded, we tend to be quick to judge and to cut people out if they do not share the same views or beliefs as us. However, now if you have a child, you have a special attachment, a unique attachment to your child, because you've invested in them, and also you have a deep sense of affection towards them. This means that when you have differing views from them, you're more encouraged to sort of get to know them, understand different perspectives, so that you can understand your child and get to know them more, and re-establish a sense of harmony in your household. So it means that it trains you to empathize with society, to juggle with different ideas, and learn to respect other people, even if your ideas might differ. This is important for diversity in thought as a person, and it helps you learn more about yourself, because it stops the echo chamber that you're trapped in when you do not have a child in your household giving you different opinions. So on the outside of the house, it's difficult to achieve this form of personal development to the same extent, because the point at which you find a partner or a friend is contingent upon having some form of similarities that people bond upon in the first place. So you don't get the same incentive to explore different avenues of thought and experiences. So why is it important? Why is having children important for the human race, both currently and in the future? Because without children, you have no incentive to sustain. There's basically no one that is there to sustain the systems in the future. This is logical if you think about it, like in terms of who's going to fuel the workforce in the future. Because if you don't have children now, then there's no one that works in the workforce in the future to sustain like healthcare, education systems, and most importantly, there's no one that's going to take care of you. Because in order for you to and your welfare to be sustained when you're somebody who can no longer afford to be economically productive due to your declining state of health because of your age, children are critical to continue this economic development in the country, to continue to fuel the country with funds such that these funds can trickle back into like welfare benefits for all people and the people that you proceed to become as you age. So what happens if you stop having children, or if you decide not to have children, is that you don't have someone who can take care of you. And this means that the whole economy suffers because you don't have someone to propel the economy, and so on. So this creates a burden on the current population. Proposition stood up and told you just now that we're not affecting the kids currently in existence. We're telling you that you do affect the kids currently in existence because it's these kids that need to deal with the effects of your decision to stop having children. Because these are the kids that need to deal with the aging population now. As it is in status quo, we're dealing with the aging population, but this will become even worse when the production of kids stops entirely, or when more people choose not to have kids, resulting in this production slowing down. So it means that the current population needs to retain, or rather tackle the burden of having to provide for more old people as a result of there being fewer people fueling the economy. So in other words, you put pressure on these kids, and if you say that this is principally wrong, it's principally wrong to make them live in the terrible conditions that they do. This is an example of how you achieve those terrible conditions in the first place, because you put them in a situation where they have to now bear the economic burden of an aging population. But finally, it is important for the continuity of the human race also because it changes the way in which you see how you interact with the world around you. Because if you don't have children and you know that society is not going to progress, that whatever technology or whatever jobs you put your effort into are not going to develop and not going to progress, it changes your mentality. You stop prioritizing progress. You stop trying your best because you know that eventually the economy is going to stagnate, and in the long term all your efforts do not matter. So this can lead to severe psychological discomfort because you know now that all the efforts that you put into everything you do are not going to lead into any sustainable outcome. So for all those reasons, you result in declining motivation to continue functioning as you would, and poor outcomes for people currently and in the future. Proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank you very much for that speech and call on the Deputy Prime Minister to go and get here.
I think Stefany ignores the context that Elsa provides to you today, which is that there are currently a lot of issues in the status quo that we need to address, and bringing more children into existence is not going to address those problems, and it's going to make everything worse. She tells you about the environment, about structural issues that exist, about how there are already a lot of children that exist in the status quo that need for us to take care of, right? And we shouldn't be bringing more children into existence when that is a need to take care of. I just want to quickly respond to what Steph just told us about workforce sustaining and all that kind of stuff, right? About aging population. I think the status quo, what it looks like is there are populations such as in the West where we have aging populations and stuff like that, and we have a lot of places where there are mass overpopulation issues that need to be addressed, right? We think that the solution to the lacking of workforce in developed places isn't to make more children into those bring more children into those places, but it's probably to allow borders to open so that we can bring other people into places where we have better education systems, better healthcare, better governance, and things like that. I think that once there is a decreasing population, there's going to be the political incentive to do so, because it's no longer going to be the immigrants are taking our jobs narrative, but it's that we need the immigrants to help fix our economy. I think that we get to solve that issue on our side of the house instead of making the situation worse. Right, I want to talk about why we have more responsibility towards people who currently exist rather than potential people, and then I'm going to talk about choice and then other stuff. Okay, first, like on pain and suffering and why we have a duty towards people who currently exist. There are currently people who already exist, and those people can necessarily feel pain and suffering. Whether you know that you think that it's through the mass majority of the life doesn't matter, that exists, right? Potential people like a baby who doesn't exist in the status quo doesn't have the ability to feel that pain and suffering, right? So they're not a subject that exists that can feel that pain or suffering, right? I think we therefore have a duty towards trying to mitigate the pain and suffering that existing people already have. Like if you see a drowning person, you wouldn't say that just because you have no biological or friend relationship with them, that suddenly there's someone that you don't have to care about. But you find that morally abhorrent if you could save that person and you didn't save that person, even if they're not someone who is related to them. If you let them die, that's a moral harm on your side. Given that, I think that we should therefore help people who currently exist instead. This looks like, for example, adopting children who exist, or fostering children or anything of the sort instead of having your own biological child. This looks like trying to care for things like climate change and not bringing in more people who consume all the goods that lead to climate change, or more people who work in the shitty companies that lead to more climate change. It's probably a good thing that we not bring really crappy human beings into existence, because humans are kind of terrible. But anyway, Steph says people should be less self-centered because having kids is an opportunity to be caring and all that. I think that if you can only care about people because they're your own biological child, that's probably a harm on yourself, and that is your own moral failing. I think that given all the harms that Elsa and I point out that exist in the current world, if you don't care about that just because you don't have a stake in it, then I think that is your fault, and I think that's something that you should self-reflect on. But I also think it was just selfish that you have to have that biological connection in order to care about the world. If that is your motivation to have a child, I don't think that should be your motivation to have a child, and if it is, you shouldn't. But also, just there are lots of people who aren't parents and aren't self-centered. There are lots of people who aren't parents who have very fulfilling lives. People don't have to have children in order to reap these benefits. And also parents can just suck, right? Not every parent is perfect, because it's quite hard to care about your child in every single way possible. Especially because there are so many things that you have to do to maintain a healthy relationship with your child and make sure your child has a happy life. I don't think you can guarantee that is something that is true, right? I'm also going to talk about disproportionate harms to women. I think this matters because obviously because women matter, but also because Steph tells you about why this is a choice that women might want to make, right? I think I think we have to recognize, right? This isn't necessarily a choice, because we have lived entire lives with media telling us that having a children is so important, that this is something that is the natural progression of our lives. This is something that our parents tell us again and again, that is a duty for us to bring children so they have a grandchild to take care of. These are narratives that we've lived our entire lives with. I think these are narratives that are very harmful towards women who might not actually want to make those decisions and might want to have fulfilling careers instead, but cannot, because the entire society is telling them that this is this is what they have to do, and this is their maternal thing to do, and they are failing as a human, as a mother, and as a woman if they don't make this choice. I therefore don't think it is necessarily a meaningful choice that they get to claim on their side of the house. But also the harms to women, right? Pregnancy, for example, there's lots of health risks. You can literally die. A lot of people have to go off life-saving medicines because this will harm their fetus. There's time off that you have to take from things that matter to you in your life. This often means that you don't get the career progression that you want, because you don't get paid the same amount, because you're the fear of you taking maternity leave and things like that, and therefore you don't get the things that you might also want. But also postpartum issues, depression, body image issues. There's a lot of things that happen to a woman through pregnancy. Also, taking care of a child is can be really harmful to a woman, right? Because I think status quo, there's already an expectation that women continue to stay in the workforce, thanks to A, feminism, but also B, capitalism, right? You increasingly have to have both parents working so you can make sure that your child can have a good education, that you can send them to college and things like that. But crucially, there still is an expectation for women to be the people who are at home taking care of their babies, right? Even though there is this financial uplifting of women, that they're now able to access the job and the market economy, the expectation is still there that they're going to be the people who are packing lunches for their children and picking them up for soccer practice. I think that therefore there's a double responsibility that is put onto women, and it's something that we shouldn't stand behind, right? Also, I just think that there's a massive psychological harm towards women, not just the postpartum stuff, but also you're always going to be wanting to give more to your child, because this narrative is that you have to sacrifice your own livelihood and your own happiness for your child. You're never going to feel fulfilled, because there's always more you can do, and also there's always more money you can earn, more time you can spend with your child, better education that you can give to your child. There's never going to be fulfillment on their side of the house. I think this is the harm that they give towards women. But also onto the children can't consent stuff. Steph tells you that existence gives them a choice to live. I say that that's not true because like they don't exist to begin with, right? You're not giving a choice to a being that already exists. You're bringing a being into existence just to give them a choice. I don't think that is meaningful choice. I also think that like it's not meaningful choice just because you say that like once you're in existence you might like to live but I think the same coercion exists, right? Because you're already living, you already have those life experiences. By the age you are to like start doubting your existence and have existential fear, you already have those kind of formulated relationships with your parents, with your friends and stuff like that, and therefore you're like more coerced into not wanting to leave this world because you already have those relationships. I don't think that's a meaningful choice that we're granting people. I think the crucial thing is we have to weigh up the fact that parents have a choice. They don't have to bring a child into existence, and like a child doesn't have the choice, right? So even if they get to claim that there is going to be some positive utility that a child might experience in their life, I think that is a risk that we're taking because it's not certain, especially given all the reasons that Elsa gives you, like poverty, lack of basic services, conflict, structural discrimination, experiences like mental health illness, like things like that. Like a quarter of you are likely to have mental health issues in your life, half of them are likely to be women, a lot of them are likely to be persons of color because statistically you're going to be born in like India or China. I think all of these things are structurally like weighed against you before you even exist as a human. I think that therefore we should make the choice to not bring this suffering into the world. Very proud of you for this.
I'd like to thank you very much for that speech and call on
Breaking news, population numbering. Where are they now, 20 years later? No kidding.
Life is not easy. We're not going to contest that on this side. However, I think, and we think, Steph and I, think that it's a really important thing to acknowledge that without the ability to be able to contribute to your future in a very personal, meaningful way necessarily changes the way in which you view your own life, in which you view your own existence, in which you view all of the pain that government tells you is so harmful. I think that having children is a way that we can alleviate the idea that we are alone in the world, that we suffer in the world, and gives us a new perspective on why life is so important and why we should value it. I'm going to be doing a few things in this speech today. First of all, I'm going to be looking at kind of the attacks we got to Steph's speech and like defending why what her stuff, the stuff that she said, is still very important. Then I'm going to be doing some responses to what we just heard from Anita. Then I've got kind of two broad themes that I want to talk about in the speech, which is first of all, why being a parent is like quite a unique benefit that you can get as an individual, which is quite difficult to get in other forms and other walks of life, and what exactly my obligation as a parent is, and why we think that it's still legitimate for me as an individual, or whoever that individual is, to be able to make the choice to bring another person into the world. And then second of all, looking at my place in the whole future, and why we think this isn't just a debate about you as an individual, but also the impact that you make when you bring that child into the world on society, basically. So first of all, then looking at the response that we get to Steph's speech. And there was this big kind of idea in our response to kind of how having a children means that you are more likely to be able to appreciate how important it is to create a world, to create like a good environment for your child to live in. No, that doesn't have to be on like a global scale, but it can even mean just making sure that your child's surroundings in their community are very positive and have more of an incentive to work for that. First of all, we want to acknowledge that their attack is that you can still be not selfish if you don't have children. And that's not what we're contesting, but I think it does often change individuals' perspectives when they have a child of what the other dimensions surrounding them are. And other individuals that don't have children can also have this perspective, but I don't think that ignores the fact that you think more about the future when you've got another mouth to feed. You think more about how much money you're going to have to save and how you can live most efficiently and save money and things like that towards your future. You're less likely to think that way when you don't have children. But also, second of all, Anita talks about how we need to control population growth and that you're more likely to get things like more open immigration when you have less people on the planet. But I'm just not sure as to what their justification, what their incentive for that is. Because if pain in existence is so terrible as they say, then surely the motivation then is to just end the human race in total. So I don't know how you get any benefits to improving the world when you just want the human race to run out. I think that's a pretty terrifying thing to stand behind, and I think that there are benefits to life that they ignore. But also, second of all all of this stuff about kind of how pregnancy is really terrible for, if I'm a woman, for example, and I'm going to be carrying this child myself, and that's really, really harmful for me for all the negative impacts. But presumably, like, if I'm the person that they characterise and that I have the choice of whether to make this child, I've taken all of these impacts of what pregnancy can do to me and what it can do to my career into account. So presumably I as an individual can still make a meaningful choice about how this is going to impact me. I don't think it's fair for them to characterise that I necessarily as a woman am going to be coerced into this choice, especially since by their own characterisation this motion is happening in a world in which you are a person in a position where you can have choice of whether or not you have children. I don't think it's then fair for them to say in their second speech that we have to be defending someone who is coerced into making that choice in the first place. I think we can have this debate assuming that person is going to be having a free choice, but also on their side, know all of the stuff about the coercion that they talk about is that that person still has that want and that desire to have a child, and on their side you don't fulfill that choice. So you feel like you want to bring a life into the world and get the benefits of that, but you're never able to on our side. I think that actually means that woman's choice, if that's how they want to characterise this, feels more restricted on their side because she can't have the experience of having a child.